You are watching Canadian Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. From Toronto, Ontario, I'm Catherine Bullock. Assalamu alaikum and greetings of peace. We have covered on this show many times what's going on in India with the rise of Hindu nationalism. There are Hindus also speaking out about what's happening. We will talk to someone from the Hindus for Human Rights organisation, Ria Chakrabarty. But first, some news headlines. Canadian officials met with the Taliban several times. 6 youth charged for attacking Syrian boy in Ottawa. Colin May sues Alberta's Justice Minister for firing him. UN appeals for $816 million for Pakistan flood victims. Now the details. Documents obtained through access to information law by a media source reveal that Canadian government officials have met with Taliban representatives on at least 13 occasions since they swept to power. The documents reveal that various officials of Global Affairs Canada and representatives of allied countries have been pressing the Taliban in these meetings in Qatar to grant the right to education to women. They also urged the Taliban to fight terrorism and allow a safe exit to Afghans willing to leave the country. A Global Affairs Canada spokesperson says Canada has no intention of recognizing the Taliban as the government of Afghanistan. 6 Ottawa youths are facing charges of robbery and intimidation after attacking last month a high school Muslim boy who is a Syrian orphan, reports a media source. Ottawa police announced the charges in a news release Monday, calling the incident one based on multiple hate-motivated offences. An investigation team has been formed, including a robbery unit, youth-focused officers, and the school board. An online petition sprung up last month when the video went viral of a youth from Gloucester High School in Ottawa being thrown to the ground and then kicked by several teenagers. Ottawa Muslim groups call the attack on the Syrian orphan youth an Islamophobic attack. Colin May is suing the Alberta government and Alberta's Justice Minister for firing him from the position of Alberta's Human Rights Commission chief. May alleges that his removal was a wrongful termination with politically motivated interference. He is seeking $2.1 million in lost salary and damages. May is also seeking a declaration that he was wrongfully terminated and the government breached its contract by removing him. May had been with Alberta's Human Rights Commission since 2019. He was named chief earlier this year. Soon after, he came under fire for writing an Islamophobic book review 13 years ago. The UN on Tuesday issued a revised flash appeal for $816 million to cope with the devastation in Pakistan caused by unprecedented rains and floods, claiming nearly 1,700 lives. The UN Secretary-General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator called for a robust response to the humanitarian crisis unfolding in the wake of recent superfloods. The revised assistance plan, 5 times higher than the original appeal, was launched at a ceremony in Geneva. Pakistan's State Minister for Foreign Affairs said the government and other aid agencies have so far reached only 20% of the total flood victims across the country. And that's it for the news. Muslims know what it's like to be blamed and lumped together with Muslims who are committing atrocities in the name of Islam. And this is not something that only Muslims face. All groups face this. We are joined by someone from Hindus for Human Rights, Ria Chakrabarty, who is the policy director there at that organization, speaking out against Hindu nationalism in India, which is ramping up its violence against Muslims and other minorities. Thank you for joining us on the show today.
Thank you for having me. So Hindus for Human Rights, as you explained, is a Hindu group speaking out against violence done in the name of Hinduism in India. Our work provides an explicitly Hindu voice in support of social justice issues facing our diaspora and our communities in South Asia. We are guided by the values of truth, justice, and peace to fight against hate and bigotry in all its forms in and around the world. While in countries in Afghanistan, we often speak about the treatment of Hindus, we also speak out against how Hinduism is being misused by the Hindu nationalist government in India to persecute minorities based on religion and caste.
India has a reputation for being the land of tolerance and pluralism and the non-violent movement of, Mahatma Gandhi. What has your organization been around for a very long time, or is this rise of Hindu nationalism has prompted the founding of your group?
Yeah, so our group was founded in 2019 after Narendra Modi was re-elected. And so our founders saw that there weren't a lot of Hindu American groups who spoke out against Hindu nationalism in India or even in the diaspora, and instead were some of the largest and loudest supporters of the Modi government in the world. So our co-founders went to, for instance, the Howdy Modi rally that happened in Houston and protested, saying that not all Hindus and not all Hindu Americans support this particular government and its movement. Unfortunately, what we do know as well is that the Hindu diaspora is disproportionately upper caste, middle class, well-to-do, and because of that, they represent the exact political base that the BJP has targeted. Hindu nationalism, in and of itself, is a pretty old movement. It comes from the 1930s, 1920s, when the founders of the movement took inspiration from the fascists in Italy and Germany. They went to Italy to learn from Mussolini on how to create a political movement in India that would be very similar to the fascist movement in Italy. And Golwalkar, who was one of the founders of the RSS, even went as far as to say that he took inspiration from Hitler and the Holocaust for how he thought Indian society should be designed and to solve the problem of religious minorities in India. So Hindu nationalism is a quite old problem. And on top of that, RSS members actually assassinated Mahatma Gandhi, whose birthday India celebrated yesterday, because he wanted to create a secular India. That movement has been on the fringes for most of Indian history, but with the rise of Narendra Modi, that movement come into the mainstream. First in Gujarat, when he was chief minister in 2002, he oversaw the largest pogrom of anti-Muslim violence in India since independence, and his government was implicitly involved in not responding, and there have been allegations that he actually was involved, to the point that the US government banned him from entering the US until he became prime minister. When he became
Sorry to cut you there. I just want to. Are we going to run out of time soon? The Muslims know what it's like to be blamed, for the actions of right-wing extremists in their organization. Very quickly, just tell us how a value of Hinduism that you feel is being perverted here. What has motivated you to, sort of be part of a group called Hindus for Human Rights?
Yeah, so one of the values of Hinduism is this pursuit of justice. For me, as a Hindu, one of the stories that I hold dear to my heart, and as a Bengali Hindu specifically, is the story of Durga. And Durga was this goddess who's who we're actually celebrating right now, who fought for justice, and through her righteous fight for justice, was able to protect all of humanity and all of the gods. And her story is one of both peace, but you cannot have peace without justice. And for me, Hindus for Human Rights is an organization guided by these ideas of peace and justice, but without justice, you can't have peace. And Hindus for Human Rights, as its name suggests, and as our organization does, is trying to provide a counterpoint to the kind of Hinduism that the Modi government and Hindu nationalists are trying to create throughout India.
we've heard that Indian heritage people like yourself and Hindus people like yourself supporting peace and justice for all are the subject of death threats themselves and a lot of pushback from the Modi supporters. Are you experiencing that?
I personally am not, but I can also say that I'm in the diaspora. I'm an upper caste Hindu woman, and so I have a lot of privilege in the kinds of work that what protects me, right? And so if I were in India, for instance, I would face a lot more threats, not just from supporters, but from the police, from law enforcement. I would be limited in what I could say without fear of retaliation, both informally and formally. As a Hindu woman, I am not targeted because of my faith, because I am upper caste. That is another reason why I'm not targeted. And so all of these things mean that I don't have to bear as much of the brunt. And so it's now my responsibility to speak out for those people.
I'm glad to know that you're safe and commend you on your speaking out to support justice and peace for the minorities. Where does the work focus? Are you focused on lobbying the Indian government in India or the Indian embassy in the US?
So we don't really work with the Indian government because we know who the Indian government is. Instead, we work with the US government, with other governments to ask them to put pressure on the Indian government to uphold its human rights. We know that political actors, for instance, anyone in the Indian government who is in the central government isn't really going to be interested in protecting minorities. But what we do also know is that the US, for instance, has levers available to it, like aid, like speaking out, where it can at least publicly embarrass or condition its relationship to India based on its treatment of minorities and the deterioration of human rights in India.
The organizations that we know who are doing similar work, and I gather that you also work together with them, Justice for All, find that these pleas to make human rights a priority sometimes fall on deaf ears in both the Canadian and the US governments because they're busy pursuing trade with India. Are you finding a receptive ear, or are you finding that it's a real uphill battle?
It's a bit of an uphill battle. One of the biggest issues, particularly in the US India relationship, is deepening security ties between the US and India, especially to combat increasing Chinese military presence in the Indo Pacific. So, one of the things that we have said is that this is a false choice between human rights and national security interests. If India is less democratic, if it is violating its minorities' rights, if it is using US military resources to violate people's human rights, then that makes India a less reliable security partner. And so we have to make the case that if India is indeed this free, fair democracy, then it has to actually be a free and fair democracy.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time, but thank you very much for the work that you do and for coming on the show to tell us about it.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for watching. If you like what we do, please share, like, and subscribe. Stay safe and God bless.